Hello, pilgrims. Today is October 26th, and we are officially in the first week of the spiritual exercises. This audio is going to focus on the next spiritual exercise, sort of the next tool in your tool belt for prayer, and it's called the Examen. It is really wonderful in that it helps you review your entire day. It takes less than 10 minutes usually. It can be done at night or on a lunch break while you're sitting in a carpool line. You could, if you technically wanted to, you could do it before or after you use your prayer sheet if you have that kind of time in one sitting. But what I'm going to ask you to do is practice it daily because that's the way it's supposed to be practiced. Now, if I were to ask you, what is the purpose of making your reviews at the end of your prayer time? You would probably say you're doing it first to remember anything important God was revealing to you, but also to ensure that you were noticing your own interior movements in response to God during your prayer time. Well, this prayer tool, the Examen, basically you're going to do the same thing, but instead of just focusing on your prayer time, you're focusing on your entire day. So the last 24 hours since the last time you prayed the Examen. This prayer used to be something similar to an examen of conscience. Examination of conscience might be the term that you're familiar with. You might have prayed with a worksheet at some point that took you through maybe the 10 Commandments and what is often called the 7 vices. That would be pride, lust, greed, envy, gluttony, wrath, sloth, these sorts of things. And you would pray through this it's oftentimes a little worksheet given to you, and ask the Holy Spirit to search you and show you where you might have committed any of these sins. I do something like this at New Year's as part of my New Year's retreat because I want to leave behind any sin patterns that I had from the year before. As I walk into the new year. Some people do something like this during Lent. Roman Catholics have traditionally done it before they receive the sacrament of reconciliation, usually referred to as confession. And in many ways, this is probably very similar to this is sort of what Ignatius had in mind when he asked people doing the exercises. Now, this would have been people cloistered. So they're in a setting where they're doing the exercises in 30 days, right? And all they're doing all day is they're doing 5 and 6 of these prayer periods with little breaks in between. And he would have had them do something similar to this around lunchtime and dinner, right? And he felt that this was just really important to stop and say, okay, where am I falling short today? Lord, but he also said that we were to be grateful, right? So it was like 2 parts, sort of a gratitude towards God, and then what have I done that has fallen short? But what's interesting was that over time, it kind of began to be sort of rote for many Jesuits. Remember, Ignatius founded his religious order that we refer to as the Jesuits. And so after Vatican II, a guy named George Aschenbrenner wrote an article in Review for Religious offering a new perspective on the Examen prayer as a practice more in light of consciousness. Notice the 3 syllables there, consciousness versus conscience. In this prayer, you discern how you are conscious of God's activity throughout the day. So the way he describes it is, though we were always told that the examen of conscience in religious life was not the same as preparation for confession, it was actually explained and treated in much the same way. The prime concern was with whether our actions had been good or bad, and that was kind of just how it was looked at and how they were behaving toward it. So he said, basically what he pointed out is that the problem with this was that in discernment, which Ignatius is real big on discernment, and we will get into that in a few weeks, the prime concern is not with the morality of good or bad actions. Rather, the concern is how the Lord is affecting and moving us deep in our own affective consciousness. That's when the name change kind of took place. So this was like in the 70s. And since then, people have called it the consciousness examen. And that's pretty much how it's done nowadays. The way that you're going to learn it, the way anybody I think you went through the exercises with, this is how it would be treated. So, in other words, the examen is not about taking account of my behavior or going through a checklist of the 10 Commandments and the vices or capital sins. Instead, I look back on the day to discern what God was trying to communicate or teach through different moments, no matter how great or mundane the moments could have been. So that's what we'll be doing. Now, what's fascinating is I have read myself and I've heard in lectures, people talk about how important this was to Ignatius. He really felt that this pausing, in their case, twice a day at lunch and again in the evening, it was to sort of take stock in the day. And there's apparently one young priest wrote to him, because by the time he died, he had over 1,000 members of his Jesuit order that were all over the known world at the time. And one wrote to him and said that he was so busy writing sermons and giving mass and serving the poor and begging alms, as they did back then. And he reported to Ignatius that he simply did not have time to make these examens. And Ignatius wrote back and said, you can stop any of those things except your examens. And so this really was important to him. He really felt it was important to notice where we were walking in step with God's Spirit and when we were not walking in step with God's Spirit. And he sort of felt like that was the most important thing for a Christian to know, right? So there are actually many good reasons to pray the examen, especially in its modern day form. From my perspective as a spiritual director, I find that most of my directees need to do this practice. If you've been in private spiritual direction with me, you know I've probably asked you to begin doing this at some point. And that's because I have found that most people are not that conscious. And so they often come to spiritual direction. I'm thinking of two people in particular who both came to me because they were in a discernment process. One was about a job, and the other one was about a religious vocation. And it was fascinating as I talked to them, they were just sort of making pros and cons lists and trying to figure out what seemed like the right move and what was the wrong move. But when I asked them questions about what they were sensing, what was going on underneath the surface in their heart, in their desire, in their emotions, in their gut, how was God speaking to them in those ways? They honestly couldn't answer. And hey, you know, I get that because I'm a head person too. Some of you know that I am actually going through a training right now that focuses on the Enneagram triads. And this is sort of the idea that most people, right, like we're all supposed to be using our head and our gut and our emotions, but most people tend to lean in to one and sort of don't lean into the other two like they should, which is sad because God gave us all three because he wants us to use all three. And so basically what this training has been about is about helping us as spiritual directors, help people get in touch with all three. And interestingly, they're using Ignatius as their example of someone that knew how to do this and taught people how to do this. And so anyway, the question now becomes, well, how do I do it? And I'm going to give you some simple ways to get started. I'm actually going to give you 4 methods. 2 are audio for those of you who just want to push play and have somebody walk you through it. And the other 2 are written, and those were attached to the email. So the first one is an actual app. I think it's the simplest. And it is watered down. I'm going to be honest with you. It doesn't have the full 5 steps that we normally think of when we talk about praying the examen, but it's a good way to get started. And so the app is called Lectio 365, Lectio, and then a space, and then the numbers 365. Once you download the app, you'll notice that they have a morning prayer and a night prayer. That's what they call it, just says night. And the night prayer, like I say, at least has the two major parts of the examen, which is where did I see God at work today? What am I thankful for? And where did I move away from God? Where did I walk into sin today? So it at least encapsulates those, but it also has some scripture. They always say a traditional nighttime prayer at the end. The downside to this one is that the two people's voices are very soothing and they play the soft music. And a lot of people say, I can never get to the end. I fall asleep. Well, you know what? There are worse things than falling asleep in prayer. I mean, think about it. Every mother or father loves for their child to curl up in their arms and fall asleep. So I don't think the Lord is angry with us when that happens. That's fine. But we do want to try to get through our Lectio if we can. So another good audio option, less likely to fall asleep, would be an actual podcast by Summer Gross called The Presence Project. There's a particular episode. She actually explains the examen very well and gives some examples of people who have used it and why it was helpful. But separate from that, she has just basically what she did was she recorded herself going through the steps of the examen, just giving the prayer prompts and then giving space for you to pray in response to her prompts. And so what you could do is you could download just that little episode. It was actually on September 8th, 2022, if you want to go try and find it. It's only 7.5 minutes long. And again, all you have to do is push play and she walked you through it. Now, let's say you start praying with one of these audios and you go, oh my gosh, I can never get through what I'm praying. And they move on to the next thing and I'm having to turn around and push pause, but my phone is already locked and, it becomes an ordeal. So you decide instead, you just want to use a sheet of paper with the prayer prompts on it. After you do it for a couple of weeks, you'll memorize the prompts anyway. Well, in that case, I've given you two different forms. Now, understand nowadays, Jesuits have all kinds of different forms of the examen. In fact, Mark Thibodeau, I think his app is reimagining the examen. I think he has 30, so you can do a different form of the examen every day. Sometimes focusing on consolations and desolations, sometimes focusing on emotions, sometimes focusing on different relationships. Like the idea is you can focus on different things depending on where you're at in life and what's going on with you. But in the two I'm giving you, these are just two good ways to get started. The first one is the one that I think was called something like IA, maybe Wk6 basic examen, I think is what I called it. And in this one, you begin by acknowledging God's presence with you and ask him to help you review your day from his perspective. Step 2 is reviewing your day with gratitude, thanking God for the blessings of the day. Step 3 is review the past 24 hours and just notice anything that stands out to you. What we want to do in this step is sort of notice what led us away from God. And then step 4 is to basically repent for whatever it was that stood out to you where you sort of walked away from God. So if step 2 is a sort of gratitude and the things that you're grateful for, right? Step 3 is sort of, where I didn't respond to God. Like I said, step 4 would be your confession and asking for forgiveness. And then step 5 is looking at the day ahead and asking the Lord how you might need his grace or help in the day ahead. Now, the other sheet that I gave you focuses on emotions. And in that one, the first 2 steps are pretty much the same. Lord, come be with me. Help me review my day. Give me not just my perspective on my day, but your perspective. The second one is to be grateful, right? Just thank God for something that happened during the day that you want to stop and say thank you for. And then step 3 is what sort of emotions have you experienced in the last 24 hours? And then you literally go through your day and you think, well, in the morning, things were really crazy because we overslept slightly. But then, and around lunchtime, I met some other moms for a play date, and it was really great. And it was just a time where I felt full of joy. And then in the afternoon, I got a call from a teacher, and, I was really embarrassed about what my child had done and the reason she was calling me. So what you're doing is you're going through the day and reviewing your emotions. Then step 4 is to pray into one emotion in particular. This again is sort of that idea of linger with what provokes you, right? You're going to press into this and you're going to say, why did I do that? What happened that made me overreact and say that thing or respond in the flesh, right? These are the sorts of things that you want to do in step 4. Just pick one of the emotions and pray into it, whether it's good or bad. And then again, step 5 is to sort of review the day, the next day, if you're doing it at night, or the next 24 hours, however you want to look at it. And you want to consider what emotions might come up over the next 24 hours. So, gosh, my mother-in-law is coming into town, and that always feels stressful. Or I have that meeting at church, and I'm excited about it, but I don't want to overtalk, and so you basically come before God, reviewing the next day from more of an emotional standpoint, and ask him to help you regulate those emotions. And then again, anyway, that's all 5 steps. And so that's just another way to pray the Examen. And so you have sheets on those 2, the basic Examen, and then this other one, which I think I don't even remember what that one's called, but it's the other sheet. It's the PDF one. And so whatever way you do it, whether you do one of the audio guided or whether you do one of these prayer sheets, and just like I said, if you printed it out and used it for a few days, you'd get used to the questions on either one. If, however, all of this still feels like too much and you're like, I just can't do this, then wade into the shallow end of the pool, okay? Just pick one time a day, okay? And remember one thing that you are grateful for. Thank God for it. And then think of one time where you knew you blew it and ask God to forgive you, okay? If that's all you can begin with for the first couple weeks, that's fine. But I do not want you to treat this like, well, I just do that all the time, all throughout the day. When I'm thankful, I just thank God. And when I, when I sin, I automatically ask for forgiveness. Well, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you live like that. We all need to live like that. However, this is about, like I say, going a little bit deeper. So I'm letting you kind of wade in with that little simple one, if that's what you need to get you started. But within a couple weeks, we need to actually stop. We need to pause, and we need to reflect deeply on these things. And that's the importance of the Examen, and it will help you further down the line when we get to talking about discernment. So the important thing for now is to pick a time of the day, pick a way you want to do it, and then just start it. Just try it. Try a few different ones if you need to. The goal is to have eyes, ears, emotions, gut intuition, and minds that recognize God at work, and that recognize when we're pulling away from God at work. That's the goal of the Examen. That's what we're going to try to do. I love you all and hope you have a great rest of your week. And I hope you actually come to enjoy this practice.